The morning rush at the little diner always started the same way. The smell of coffee filled the air before the sun had even climbed over the line of trees across the street. The sound of the coffee machine, the clinking of plates, and the chatter of early customers made the place feel alive. Behind the counter, Mara moved quickly, her apron tied neatly and her hair tucked behind her ears. She had worked there for years and knew almost every face that came through the door. The diner wasn't fancy. It had a few booths lined up against the windows and some bar stools in front of the counter. The wallpaper had started to peel in places, and the ceiling fans made a faint humming sound all day. But it was warm and familiar, the kind of place people came to when they wanted a good meal and someone to smile at them. Mara liked her job, even though it was hard work. She wasn't the kind of person who complained. She liked being around people, hearing their stories, and making sure everyone left with a full stomach. Her boss, a kind old man named Mr. Tate, trusted her with almost everything. Most days, everything felt predictable, until one afternoon, when she saw the boy. It was late, maybe after 3 in the afternoon. The lunch crowd had gone, and the diner was quiet except for the sound of a radio playing softly in the corner. Mara stepped outside to throw some trash into the bin behind the building. That's when she noticed him, sitting on the low wall near the alley, knees drawn to his chest. He looked about 10 or 11 years old. His clothes were too big for him, a faded shirt and pants that looked like they hadn't been washed in days. His hair was messy and he had a tired look in his eyes. What caught her attention most was how still he was. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even look around. He just stared at the ground, as if the world around him didn't exist. Mara stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. The boy didn't seem to be bothering anyone, but something about him tugged at her heart. She wanted to ask if he was okay, but she didn't want to scare him away. After a few seconds, she went back inside. That evening, when the last customers had gone, she packed up a leftover sandwich and a small carton of milk. She hesitated for a moment before stepping outside again. The boy was still there, sitting in the same spot. She walked slowly toward him and said softly, "Hey there, you hungry?" The boy lifted his head a little. His eyes were a deep brown, almost black, and they looked at her with a mixture of fear and confusion. He didn't answer. Mara placed the food on the wall beside him and said, "You don't have to say anything. It's just something to eat. It's still warm." For a few seconds, he didn't move. Then very carefully, he reached out and took the sandwich. He didn't say thank you, didn't make a sound, just nodded once and began to eat slowly, like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in a long time. Mara didn't want to make him uncomfortable, so she smiled and said, "I'll be inside if you need anything, okay?" Then she walked back to the diner, but she couldn't stop thinking about him. The next day, she looked for him again. He came around the same time, sitting quietly in the same place. This time, she didn't wait until closing. She brought him a bowl of soup and a roll. The boy looked surprised when she handed it to him. "You can eat here if you want," she said. "It's warmer inside." He shook his head. "Okay," she said gently. "Then I'll bring it out here." That became their routine. Every afternoon after the lunch rush, the boy would appear. He never spoke, never asked for anything. He just waited patiently, and Mara always brought him something to eat. Sometimes it was soup, sometimes pancakes, sometimes just a sandwich and an apple. After a few days, she tried to get him to talk. "What's your name?" she asked once, handing him a cup of hot chocolate. He just looked at her and then looked down. She waited, but no sound came. "You don't have to tell me," she said kindly. "You can just nod if you like the food." He nodded once, then took a sip of the hot chocolate. For a moment, Mara thought she saw a small smile, faint but real. It made her heart feel lighter. She started calling him Eli, even though she didn't know his real name.
"Hey, Eli," she would say each day.
"You showed up right on time." The boy never corrected her. Mara didn't tell anyone about him at first. She was afraid her boss might tell her to stop, or someone might scare him away. He seemed fragile, like a bird that might fly off if someone came too close. So she kept it quiet. Sometimes when she finished her shift, she would sit near him and talk about her day, not expecting any response. She told him about the customers, about how Mr. Tate had burned another batch of bacon, or how one of the waiters kept forgetting orders. She wasn't sure if he listened, but it felt nice to talk. Days turned into weeks. Eli started to seem more comfortable. He didn't flinch when she approached anymore. Once, she offered him a blanket she had brought from home. He hesitated but then accepted it, clutching it close. Still, he never spoke a single word. Mara sometimes wondered if he couldn't speak or if he just chose not to. Maybe he had gone through something hard. She didn't want to push him. It was enough that he showed up and ate. One evening, as she locked the diner, she noticed a car parked across the street. It was a dark SUV with tinted windows. She didn't recognize it, and for a moment she thought she saw someone watching from inside. When she turned her head to look again, the car drove off. She told herself it was nothing, probably someone waiting for a friend. But after that day, she started noticing the same car now and then, parked in different spots near the diner. She never mentioned it to Eli. She didn't want to worry him. Winter came early that year. The air turned cold and snow began to fall. Mara started bringing Eli warm food, stew, hot cocoa, and sometimes a little pie. She even bought him a new coat from a thrift store. When she gave it to him, he looked at her with wide eyes like he couldn't believe it was for him. "It's okay," she said softly. "It's a little big, but it'll keep you warm." He nodded, his small hands gripping the coat tightly. Then he did something that surprised her. He reached out and gently touched her hand just for a moment. It wasn't much, but it said more than words could. After that, their quiet friendship felt stronger. He began leaving small things for her: a smooth stone, a folded paper crane, a tiny drawing scratched on napkins. He couldn't speak, but he had found his own way to say thank you. Mara kept his little gifts in a box under the counter. Sometimes, when the diner was busy and customers were rude, she would think about the quiet boy outside and feel calm again. People started to notice her stepping outside every afternoon with a plate of food. One of her co-workers, a young waitress named Lila, asked one day, "Who are you feeding out there?" Mara smiled and said, "Just someone who needs a meal." Lila shrugged. "You're too nice, Mara. You'll get yourself in trouble someday." Mara laughed softly. "If kindness gets me in trouble, I think I'll take that risk." The truth was, she felt protective of Eli. She didn't know where he came from or why he was alone, but she couldn't bear the thought of him being hungry or cold. Something deep inside told her that this small act of kindness mattered more than she could understand. Then one afternoon, something strange happened. Mara brought Eli his food like usual, but as she turned to go back inside, she saw him glance quickly toward the street. His face suddenly tense. She followed his gaze. The same dark SUV was parked nearby again. A man in a cap was sitting inside. When he noticed Mara looking, he started the engine and drove off. Eli's eyes followed the car until it disappeared. For the first time, Mara saw fear in them. She wanted to ask what was wrong, but before she could, he stood up and walked away quickly, leaving his food half-eaten. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the look on his face and about that car. She told herself it was probably nothing. Maybe the boy just didn't like being seen. Still, something about it felt off. The next day, she waited outside longer than usual, hoping he'd come back. He didn't. She looked up and down the street, but there was no sign of him. She felt an ache in her chest she couldn't explain. When she finally went back inside, the diner felt emptier than ever. For the next few days, she kept checking the alley, hoping he'd return. Sometimes she even packed food just in case, setting it on the wall where he used to sit. She told herself maybe he'd come by at night when no one was around. But each morning, the plate was still there, untouched. The customers still came and went, and the smell of coffee still filled the air. But for Mara, something had changed. She missed the quiet boy who never spoke. She didn't know then that her small act of kindness had set something in motion, something far bigger than she could have imagined. But for now, she only knew that a boy who once sat silently behind her diner was gone, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't just lost someone she fed. She had lost someone who had started to feel like family. So, every afternoon, even when it snowed and the cold wind bit at her fingers, she still went outside with a warm plate and a cup of cocoa. She'd set it down on the wall, whispering, "If you come back, this is for you." The townspeople thought she was just being kind to a stray kid. They didn't know how much those quiet moments had meant to her, how the boy's silent presence had filled a space in her heart she didn't even know was empty. And somewhere far away, someone else knew about her too, watching from behind dark windows, waiting for the right moment to return. Days passed, then weeks, and the boy still didn't come back. Mara had stopped expecting him to appear every afternoon. but she couldn't stop looking toward the alley each time she passed the kitchen door. It had become a habit now, that small moment of hope. Sometimes she caught herself listening for the soft sound of footsteps or the quiet shuffle of shoes on the pavement outside. But all she heard was the noise of traffic and the chatter from customers inside. The days started to feel longer. Work didn't fill the same space it used to. She smiled at people, took orders, and served plates with her usual care, but something in her was missing. It wasn't just the boy's silence she missed. It was the quiet comfort of having someone who needed her without asking for anything. One evening, while she was wiping down tables, her boss, Mr. Tate, noticed her staring out the window again. "You've been looking out there a lot lately," he said gently. "Waiting for someone?" Mara hesitated and then smiled faintly. "Just a friend. He hasn't been around." Mr. Tate nodded as if he understood more than she said. Sometimes people come and go, but they remember kindness. That kind of thing stays with them. His words stayed with her long after she left work that night. The snow had melted and spring had started to touch the town again. Birds returned to the trees near the diner, and the sunlight warmed the streets. Life went on, but not for Mara. Her eyes still searched for that one small figure sitting on the wall. Then one afternoon, he came back. It was a quiet day, not many customers around. Mara was cleaning a coffee pot when she looked up and saw him standing outside the window. Thinner, but there. For a moment, she thought she was imagining it. But when he lifted his hand slightly, she dropped the cloth and ran outside. He looked the same as before, tired eyes, messy hair, but there was something different too. He seemed more alert, like he had been somewhere far away and had finally found his way back. Mara smiled with relief. "You're here," she said softly. "I was worried about you." He didn't say anything, of course, but he gave a small nod, the same quiet nod she remembered so well. "Wait right here," she said quickly. "I'll get you something to eat." She rushed back inside, grabbed a plate of food, and brought it out. He sat on the wall again, just like before. He ate slowly, carefully, as if savoring every bite. She didn't ask where he had been. She could tell by his eyes that it wasn't something easy to talk about, even if he could talk. When he finished eating, he pulled something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. Mara unfolded it carefully. Inside was a rough drawing made with pencil, a picture of a woman standing behind a counter, smiling, with a small boy holding a sandwich. Her throat tightened. "Is this me?" she asked. He nodded again, and this time there was a shy, fleeting smile on his face. She smiled back and said softly, "It's beautiful. Thank you, Eli." That small drawing meant more to her than anything else she owned. She kept it tucked into her apron pocket for days. After that, the routine began again. He came around almost every day. Sometimes he sat outside quietly. Sometimes he drew little pictures on napkins or small scraps of paper she gave him. He still didn't talk, but his expressions said plenty. He had a way of looking at people that felt deep, like he could understand them without words. Mara tried to learn his patterns. He always showed up around the same time in the afternoon, never in the mornings. He left before it got dark. He never stayed long enough for anyone else to see him. It made her wonder where he went at night, but she never asked. She didn't want to push him away again. One late afternoon, as she handed him a sandwich, she noticed a small bruise on his arm. Her heart tightened. "Did you fall?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Someone hurt you?" He looked down, silent. Mara wanted to reach out and comfort him, but she didn't. She knew that whatever he was hiding, he wasn't ready to share. So she said, "You don't have to tell me. But if you ever need help, you can come to me, okay?" He lifted his eyes and gave a slow nod. That night, after closing, she told Mr. Tate about him. Not the details, just enough. "There's a boy who comes around sometimes," she said. "I think he might be homeless. He doesn't talk, but he's polite and gentle. I've been giving him food." Mr. Tate looked thoughtful for a moment, then smiled kindly. "You've got a big heart, Mara. If the boy needs a meal, give it to him. We'll figure out the rest later." His approval made her feel lighter. At least now she didn't have to hide it anymore. A few weeks went by peacefully. The diner had steady business, and Mara's friendship with the boy grew quietly stronger. She started keeping small snacks aside for him. Biscuits, fruit, sometimes even leftover pancakes. Then something strange began happening again. The same dark SUV started showing up near the diner. Sometimes it parked across the street, sometimes a little farther away. It wasn't there every day, but often enough that she noticed. The windows were tinted and she couldn't see who was inside. At first, she ignored it. Maybe it was just a regular customer. But one afternoon, she saw Eli looking at it too. His body suddenly stiff, his face pale. His hands clenched tightly around the sandwich she had given him. Before she could ask anything, he slid off the wall and walked away quickly, disappearing around the corner. Mara turned back toward the car, but it drove off just as she took a step forward. Her stomach sank. Something about it didn't feel right. The next day, she asked him about it. When he arrived, she said quietly, "That car, do you know it?" He hesitated, then looked away. "You don't have to be scared," she said softly. "Nobody here will hurt you." He looked up, his eyes full of fear, and shook his head quickly, as if to say she didn't understand. Then, before she could say more, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small notebook, and scribbled something. He tore out the page and handed it to her. The words were written in uneven, shaky handwriting. "Don't tell anyone I come here." Mara looked at him with worry. "Okay," she whispered. "I won't, I promise." He nodded slightly, then turned and left without finishing his food. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about the note. Who could be looking for him? Why was he so afraid? The next few days were tense. The car came and went. Sometimes she caught glimpses of a man inside, never clearly, but enough to make her uneasy. She thought about going to the police, but what would she even say? That a quiet boy came to her diner for food and someone might be watching him. They might not take her seriously, so she decided to keep watch herself. Each afternoon, she looked carefully around the street before bringing food outside. Sometimes she saw nothing. Sometimes she saw shadows moving inside parked cars. Once, she even thought she saw a small camera flash from one of them. The boy still came, though less often. When he did, he looked tired and on edge. His clothes seemed cleaner, though, like someone had given him new ones. That confused her even more. "Are you living with someone?" she asked one afternoon. He hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Do they know you come here?" He shook his head. Mara sighed softly. "Okay, you don't have to tell me more. Just be careful, okay?" He looked at her with those deep brown eyes and gave a small nod. Then he took the food, turned, and walked away again. That evening, when she stepped outside to close up, she noticed something under the bench near the wall, a small folded paper. She picked it up and opened it. It was another drawing. This one showed a small house with smoke rising from the chimney, and beside it, two figures, one taller, one smaller. Underneath, written in the same uneven letters, were two words: "Someday home." Her eyes filled with tears. He wanted a home, a safe place. That simple wish broke her heart. From that night onward, she made a silent promise. No matter what, she would keep helping him. Even if she didn't know who he was or where he came from, she couldn't turn her back on him now. But as the days went by, the strange feeling that something big was happening grew stronger. Once, when she stepped outside to leave some food, she noticed two men standing across the street. They weren't eating or talking. They just watched. When she met their eyes, they turned and walked away. It scared her, but she tried to stay calm. Maybe she was imagining things. One evening, she left work later than usual. The street was quiet and the sky was already dark. As she locked the diner door, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, heart racing. But it was just Eli. He stood there in the half-dark, clutching his little notebook. His face looked pale and he seemed nervous. "Eli," she whispered, "you scared me." He opened the notebook and wrote quickly. Then he showed her the page. "They're coming. Don't talk to them." Her breath caught. "Who?" she asked. But he had already turned and run down the street. Mara stood there for a long moment, her heart pounding. She didn't know who they were, but she knew she was in the middle of something she didn't understand. That night, as she lay in bed, she kept hearing his words in her mind. "Don't talk to them." The next morning, everything looked normal again. The diner opened, customers came in, and the smell of coffee filled the air. But Mara couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Every sound outside made her flinch a little. When afternoon came, she stepped outside as usual. The wall where the boy used to sit was empty. No sign of him. But lying on the ground was another small paper, folded tight. She picked it up and opened it carefully. Inside, drawn in pencil, was the same picture of the diner, but this time there were dark shapes in the sky above it. They looked like helicopters. She stared at it for a long time, confused, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't understand what it meant. She only knew one thing: whatever was coming. It wasn't ordinary, and deep down she felt that soon. Her quiet diner life would never be the same again. The next few days passed in a blur of confusion. Mara went to work as usual, served coffee, cleaned tables, and smiled at customers, but her mind was somewhere else. She kept thinking about the last drawing the boy had left her, the one with helicopters in the sky. It didn't make any sense, yet something about it made her uneasy. Every time the diner door opened, she hoped it would be him walking in. Every time she stepped outside, she looked toward the alley, half expecting to see his small figure waiting near the wall. But he didn't come. A part of her told herself to stop worrying. Maybe he had moved somewhere safer, maybe he was fine. But deep down she knew something wasn't right. The strange men she'd seen, the dark car, his warning. It all connected somehow. One evening, just as she was locking up, she noticed someone standing across the street. A man in a long coat. He wasn't moving, just standing still under a streetlight. She couldn't see his face clearly, but she knew he was watching her. Her heart began to pound. She turned the key quickly, locked the door, and went inside. The man didn't move, but she could feel his eyes on her. After a few minutes, she peeked through the blinds again, and he was gone. She went home that night feeling a heavy weight on her chest. She made herself some tea, but it didn't help. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. Her thoughts kept going back to the boy's face, the way his eyes had looked scared the last time she saw him. By the next morning, she had made up her mind. She needed to find him. She couldn't just sit and wait anymore. After her morning shift, she packed a small bag with food, water, and a blanket. She told Mr. Tate she needed a few hours off, and he didn't ask many questions. "Be safe," he said simply, and that was all. She started by walking through the streets near the diner, checking the corners and alleys where he sometimes went. Then she went to the small park nearby. She asked a few shopkeepers if they had seen a boy fitting his description. Thin, quiet, around 11. Most people shook their heads. One old woman said she might have seen someone like that near the bus stop a few days ago, sitting alone with a small notebook. Mara thanked her and hurried to the bus stop. It was empty now. She sat on the bench and waited for a while, watching cars pass by. Her mind kept drifting. What if he had been taken by whoever was in that car? What if he was in danger? She pulled the folded drawing from her bag, the one with the helicopters. She looked at it again. The details were small but clear. The diner, the sky, the dark shapes above it. It almost felt like a message, but she didn't know what it was trying to say. Just then a small sound made her turn. Someone was standing near the corner of the street. A little figure, half hidden behind a lamppost. Her heart jumped. "Eli?" she whispered, standing up. The boy stepped forward slowly. It was him. He looked thinner, tired, his hair messy again, but it was him. She hurried toward him, her voice soft. "Where have you been? I've been so worried." He didn't speak, of course. He looked at her for a moment, then glanced around nervously as if afraid someone was watching. Then he held out his small notebook again. She took it gently and read the words he had written. "They found me." "I can't stay," Mara frowned. "Who found you? The men in the car?" He hesitated, then nodded. His hands trembled slightly. She wanted to take him somewhere safe, but she didn't even know who was after him or why. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's go inside the diner. We'll figure it out together." He shook his head firmly, fear flashing in his eyes. Then he wrote again. "They're watching there too." She looked around. The street looked quiet, but after what she had seen before, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be nearby, just out of sight. "Then where can we go?" she asked quietly. He thought for a moment, then wrote another note. "The old train yard." Mara hesitated. The train yard was on the edge of town, an abandoned place, quiet and mostly empty. "Are you sure?" she asked. He nodded quickly, so she took a deep breath and said, "Okay, let's go." They walked quietly through the streets, keeping to the side roads. The boy moved fast like he knew the way. When they reached the train yard, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. The place was silent except for the faint sound of wind moving through the broken windows of old buildings. Rusted tracks crisscrossed the ground and a few old train cars sat there covered in dust. "This is where you've been staying?" she asked softly. He nodded. She followed him to one of the train cars. Inside there was a small pile of blankets, a few food wrappers, and a water bottle. He had made himself a little shelter. It broke her heart to see how carefully he had tried to survive. Mara sat down beside him and handed him some food from her bag. "Here," she said. "Eat. You must be starving." He ate quietly, glancing at the door every few seconds. After a while, he took out his notebook again and wrote, "They want to take me." I don't know why Mara felt a chill. "Who are they?" she asked. He hesitated, then wrote one more word. "Men." It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her stomach twist. Whoever they were, they had frightened him badly. She took his hand gently. "You're safe right now," she said. "I won't let anyone hurt you." He looked at her, his eyes soft and full of trust. Then he leaned his head on her shoulder just for a moment. It was the first time he had ever done that, and it made her heart ache with both warmth and sadness. They stayed there until the sky grew dark. When it was time to leave, she promised she would come back the next day with more food and blankets. He nodded and gave her a small smile, the kind that said thank you without words. That night Mara couldn't sleep again. She kept seeing his face, hearing the way his pencil scratched against the notebook. She thought about the men, the car, the fear in his eyes. She knew she couldn't just keep this to herself anymore. The next morning she went to the police station. She didn't tell them everything, just that there was a missing boy who seemed to be in trouble. She didn't mention his name. She didn't even know his real one. But she described him and where she had seen him last. The officer wrote it all down, nodded and said they would look into it. But when she went back to the train yard later that afternoon, he was gone. The blankets were still there, the empty food containers, even his little notebook, but he wasn't. Her heart sank. She called out softly, "Eli?" But there was no answer, only the wind blowing through the empty yard. She found a new note inside the notebook. It said, "They're close. Thank you." That was it. No goodbye, no explanation, just those two words. Mara sat there for a long time, holding the notebook in her lap. She didn't cry, but her chest felt heavy. She didn't know if he was running from danger or if someone had found him. She just hoped he was safe. Days passed, then weeks. The police said they hadn't found anyone matching her description. They told her maybe the boy had moved on, maybe he was fine. But she couldn't stop thinking about him. Every time she saw a dark car on the street, her heart jumped. Every time she heard a helicopter flying overhead, she found herself looking up. Then one quiet morning, something strange happened. It was early, before sunrise. Mara was unlocking the diner when she heard a low rumbling sound. At first she thought it was thunder, but the sky was clear. The sound grew louder, closer. Then she saw lights moving across the horizon, not one but several helicopters. They flew low right over the street, the wind from their blades whipping through the trees and rattling the diner windows. Mara froze, her keys still in her hand. The helicopters circled once, then began to descend, right in front of the diner. Dust and wind swirled everywhere. Cars stopped. People came out of buildings, shielding their eyes. It was chaos for a few seconds. Then the sound started to fade as the helicopters settled on the ground. Mara stood there, speechless. She didn't know what to do or what to think. A few men stepped out, dressed in dark uniforms. They looked serious but calm. One of them walked toward her, his voice steady but firm. "Ma'am," he said, "are you the one who works here?" Mara nodded slowly. "Yes." "What's going on?" The man glanced at the others, then turned back to her. "We've been looking for someone, a young boy. We believe he may have come here." Her heart skipped a beat. "A boy?" she said quietly. He nodded. "Yes, a mute boy. About 11 years old." Mara's throat felt dry. She didn't answer right away. Then, before she could speak, one of the helicopter doors opened, and she saw him, the boy, standing there, clean, safe, wearing new clothes. For a moment, everything around her disappeared. The noise, the people, the confusion. All she saw was him standing at the edge of the landing zone, holding his little notebook. He looked different, stronger somehow. But when their eyes met, she saw the same quiet kindness she had known all along. He smiled faintly, then walked toward her, each step slow but sure. Mara stood frozen, tears filling her eyes. She didn't know what this meant or who these people were, but she didn't care. The only thing that mattered was that he was alive. As he reached her, he opened his notebook and showed her one last message. It said, "I'm safe now. Thank you for helping me." Mara covered her mouth, trying not to cry. She wanted to ask where he had been, what had happened. But the man in uniform stepped closer and spoke gently. "Ma'am," he said, "you don't know how much your kindness has meant. You helped him when no one else could. You gave him food, shelter, and hope." Mara blinked, trying to understand. Who is he?" she asked quietly. The man smiled softly, almost with pride. "He's someone very important," he said. "Someone the whole country has been looking for." Before she could say anything else, the boy, Eli, stepped closer and did something he had never done before. He reached up, wrapped his arms around her, and hugged her tightly. It lasted only a few seconds, but in that moment, she felt everything: the fear, the relief, the bond they had built in silence. When he finally stepped back, he gave her one last look, one that said everything he couldn't say with words. Then he turned and walked toward the helicopter. Mara stood there watching as the wind picked up again and the machines lifted into the air. The sound was deafening, but she didn't move. She just watched until they disappeared into the distance. The street grew quiet again. People around her whispered and pointed, trying to figure out what had just happened. But Mara didn't say a word. She looked down and realized she was still holding the small notebook he had given her. The last page had one more message she hadn't seen before, a simple line written in his uneven handwriting. "Good people are never forgotten." She smiled through her tears. That evening, when the sun went down, Mara sat by the diner window watching the sky. It was quiet again the way it used to be, but nothing felt the same anymore. The silence didn't feel empty now, it felt full. Full of the memory of a boy who had once sat quietly by her diner, and who had changed her life without ever saying a single word. The morning after the helicopters landed outside the diner, the town felt like it had woken from a strange dream. Everyone was talking about it. The noise, the soldiers, the flashing lights, and that mysterious boy. Some said he was the son of a rich businessman. Others whispered he might be part of something bigger. Nobody knew the truth, and Mara didn't try to explain. She just kept working quietly, moving through her day as though nothing had happened. But inside she was still shaken. Every sound of a helicopter made her heart beat faster. Every time the diner door opened, she half expected someone to walk in and ask questions again. The people who came that morning talked in hushed voices. A few regulars glanced at her with curiosity, wondering how much she knew. Mr. Tate stood beside her at the counter, flipping pancakes, pretending not to notice. But every now and then he looked at her with concern. "You okay?" he finally asked softly. Mara nodded, though she wasn't sure she was. "Yeah," she whispered, "just a strange day, that's all." He didn't press. He'd known her long enough to understand she would talk when she was ready. By the end of the day, the town had calmed down, but the memory lingered. Reporters came by the next morning, asking if anyone had seen the boy before. Mara told them she didn't know much, just that he had come by sometimes for food. That wasn't a lie. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. She didn't tell them about the drawings, the notebook, or the warning. Some things were meant to stay private. When the reporters left, the diner felt quieter than usual. Mara stood at the window, staring at the empty spot near the wall where he used to sit. The sunlight hit it just right, making the cracked bricks glow faintly. For a moment she could almost see him there again. Head down, hands wrapped around a sandwich. She smiled to herself. Then she turned and went back to work. Days passed, then weeks. Life began to feel normal again, or at least something close to it. The customers came, the coffee brewed, the familiar hum of the diner returned. But every once in a while someone would still bring up that morning. The sound of helicopters, the boy, the soldiers. Mara never said much. She didn't need to. She carried her own understanding quietly, like a secret tucked in her heart. One afternoon, about 2 months later, a letter arrived. It wasn't addressed to the diner. It was addressed to her personally. The handwriting was neat and unfamiliar. Mr. Tate handed it to her when she came in for her shift. "You got mail, Mara. Don't get many of those," he said with a smile. She turned the envelope over. There was no return address, only her name written carefully on the front. She waited until her break to open it. Sitting in her favorite corner booth, She slid her finger under the seal and pulled out a single folded page. Her hands trembled a little. The first thing she saw was a small drawing, simple and clean, done in pencil. It was of her diner, the same one the boy had drawn months ago, but this time there was something new. 2 people standing in front of it. One was clearly her holding a tray. The other was him, smiling. Under the drawing were a few lines written in neat handwriting, not shaky like before. Dear Mara, I'm writing this with the help of someone who takes care of me now. I can speak a little again, but writing still feels easier. I wanted to thank you for everything you did. You gave me food when I had none. You gave me warmth when I was cold. And you gave me a reason to believe that good people still exist. I can't tell you everything about where I am, but I'm safe. The people around me are kind. They said I can go to school now and I want to draw more. I told them about you, about your diner, and how you never asked for anything in return. I still think about those afternoons. The smell of food. The way you smiled when you saw me and how you called me Eli. I like that name. I still use it sometimes. Thank you for everything. You saved me in more ways than you'll ever know. Eli Mara sat there for a long time reading the letter over and over. Her throat tightened and tears welled in her eyes. She smiled through them, her heart full and heavy at the same time. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket. The rest of the day she couldn't stop smiling. Even the customers noticed. You seem happier today, one of them said. Mara just nodded. Yeah, she said softly. It's a good day. After closing, she took the letter home and placed it inside the same box where she kept all the boys' drawings and little notes. It was getting full now, full of memories she never wanted to lose. She thought about writing back, but there was no address. She supposed that was how it was meant to be. He had said enough. For a while, life settled into a quiet rhythm again. The diner was busy during the mornings, calm in the afternoons. The regulars still came, old friends, travelers, and the occasional stranger passing through town. Mara kept working, always greeting everyone with the same warm smile. But even though Eli was gone, she still felt his presence in small ways. One rainy day, a small child came in with his mother. The boy was shy and barely spoke. When the mother apologized, saying he didn't talk much, Mara smiled gently and said, "That's okay. Sometimes quiet people have the loudest hearts." The mother smiled gratefully. The boy looked up at Mara, and for a moment, she saw something familiar in his eyes. That same deep stillness. That same searching look she'd once seen in Eli. It made her chest ache, but in a good way. Later that evening, after everyone left, she stood outside the diner, watching the rainfall. The puddles on the street reflected the glowing lights from the windows. Everything looked soft, calm, peaceful. She thought about how strange life could be, how someone could walk into your world for a short time and change it forever. Then something unexpected happened again. The next morning, just as she was setting out plates for breakfast, a black car pulled up outside the diner. Not the old SUV. This one was sleek and official-looking. 2 men stepped out, both wearing suits. They weren't from around town. Mara felt her stomach tighten. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the door. When she opened it, one of the men smiled politely and showed her a badge. "Good morning, ma'am," he said. "We're with the National Security Division. Don't worry, this isn't anything bad." She blinked in surprise. "Oh, okay. Can I help you?" He nodded. "We're following up on a matter related to a young boy you once helped, Eli." Her heart skipped. "Is he all right?" she asked quickly. The man smiled gently. "He's doing very well. He's safe, healthy, and under special care. He's made remarkable progress." Relief washed over her. "I'm so glad," she said softly. The man nodded. "We were asked to give you this." He handed her a small envelope sealed with an embossed emblem. "It's from his family." Mara took it carefully, her hands trembling slightly. "His family?" she repeated. The man nodded again. "Yes, they wanted you to know who he really is and to thank you personally for what you did." Before she could say more, the men thanked her politely and left, their car driving away quietly down the street. Mara stood there for a long moment staring at the envelope. She felt the weight of it, not just the paper inside, but everything it represented. She sat down in her booth, opened it slowly, and pulled out a letter printed on fine stationery. It began simply, "Dear Ms. Mara, there are no words strong enough to express the gratitude of a parent whose child was returned safely. Our son, whom you knew as Eli, went missing months ago during an incident that remains under investigation.
He had been through more than any child should, and when we found him,
He told us about you, the woman who gave him food, kindness, and protection when he needed it most. Because of your compassion, he survived long enough for us to find him. You reminded him that not everyone in the world is cruel. You gave him hope when he had none. We wish to thank you personally, but for now, please accept this small token of our gratitude." Inside the envelope was another folded paper, a certificate signed by a government seal, officially recognizing her for exceptional humanitarian action. Along with it was a small photo, a picture of Eli smiling, standing between two adults. He looked healthy, happy, free. Mara held the picture to her chest, tears falling quietly down her cheeks. She didn't care about the certificate or any kind of recognition. All that mattered was that he was safe and smiling again. That night, after closing, she placed the photo beside his old drawings in her box. The box was full now, of little notes, sketches, and memories that told a story of kindness, trust, and hope. The next morning, she noticed something strange outside the diner. A small package sat by the door, wrapped neatly in brown paper. There was no name, no note, just a ribbon tied around it. She brought it inside, unwrapped it, and found a framed painting. It was the same picture he had drawn once. The diner, her standing outside, and him sitting on the wall. But this time the sky above them was clear and blue. Tears filled her eyes again. It was his way of saying goodbye, or maybe thank you again. From that day on, Mara hung the painting on the diner wall, right by the window where the sunlight could touch it. People often asked where it came from, and she would smile and say, "A friend gave it to me." But in her heart she knew it was more than a gift. It was a reminder of how something small, a meal, a smile, a moment of kindness, could change an entire life. As the weeks turned into months, Mara kept going, serving coffee, greeting strangers, and helping anyone who looked like they needed a bit of warmth. She didn't need to know who people were or where they came from. All she cared about was that they felt safe for a little while, and every now and then, when she looked at that painting, she felt a quiet peace, knowing that somewhere out there, a boy named Eli was growing up, learning to speak again, learning to live again, and remembering the woman who once gave him hope in a small roadside diner. The helicopters, the mystery, the fear, all of it felt far away now. But the kindness remained, and deep down she knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something beautiful that kindness had started. A connection that no distance or silence could ever erase. The town had settled into its usual calm again. Weeks passed since the men in suits came to see Mara, and the story of the boy had faded into quiet memory for most people. Life moved on. New travelers came and went. Laughter returned to the diner, and the clatter of dishes and smell of coffee filled the air every morning. But for Mara, something inside her had changed. She no longer looked at the world the same way. She noticed things she hadn't before. The way the sun touched the windows at dawn. How tired strangers smiled when they were shown kindness. How a small word could change the mood of an entire day. Sometimes, late at night, she would look at the painting on the wall and think of him, Eli. She would imagine where he might be now, what kind of life he was living, what he was learning, and if he ever thought about her. She hoped he did, but even if he didn't, she was grateful to have been a part of his story. It was a quiet Wednesday when something unexpected happened again. The diner was half empty, the way it always was between breakfast and lunch. The hum of the refrigerator filled the background. Mara was wiping down the counter when she heard a small sound, the tinkle of the doorbell as someone walked in. She didn't look up right away. She just said her usual greeting, "Be right with you." But when she turned, she froze. There, standing just inside the doorway, was a young man, maybe 15 or 16 now. His hair was neat, his clothes clean, and in his hands he held a small backpack. He looked taller, older, and stronger than before, but his eyes, those eyes were the same. Mara's breath caught in her throat. "Eli?" she whispered. The boy smiled, that same shy, warm smile she remembered. Before she could say anything else, he stepped closer. "Hi," he said softly. The word was clear, gentle, and full of meaning. Tears instantly filled her eyes. She covered her mouth, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. You can talk?" He nodded slowly. "A little. I've been practicing," he said. His voice was quiet but steady, each word careful. Mara walked around the counter and stood in front of him, still stunned. "You came back," she said softly. He nodded again, his eyes bright. "I wanted to see you." For a long moment they just stood there. Then she pulled him into a hug. He hesitated for a second before hugging her back tightly, the way a child hugs someone they truly missed. When they finally let go, Mara wiped her eyes and laughed a little. "Look at you," she said. "You've grown so much," Eli smiled shyly. "I'm doing better now," he said. "I go to school. I have teachers who help me. I draw a lot too." "That's wonderful," she said. "I always knew you would." He looked around the diner, his eyes scanning every corner as though remembering the past. "It looks the same," he said. "Even the painting." Mara followed his gaze to the wall. The painting he had sent her hung there, framed and glowing softly in the morning light. "I kept it right there," she said. "People ask about it all the time. What do you tell them?" he asked. "I tell them it's from a friend," she said with a smile. "A very special one." He smiled back, a little blush creeping onto his cheeks. They sat together at one of the booths, the same one where she had first opened his letters months ago. Mara brought him a cup of hot chocolate and a slice of pie, just like she used to. As they talked, Eli told her about everything that had happened since he left. How he had been living with family, how he was in therapy to help him speak again, and how drawing had become his way of understanding the world. He told her how, when he felt scared or unsure, he thought about the diner, the warmth, the smell of food, the sound of her voice. It reminded him that there were good people out there. Mara listened quietly, tears slipping down her cheeks now and then, though she smiled the whole time. When he finished, he looked at her and said, "You saved me, you know." She shook her head gently. "No, Eli, you saved yourself." "You were brave. You survived." He smiled faintly. "Maybe," he said. "But you helped me believe I could." For a moment, the diner felt completely still, like time had paused just for them. Later, when Eli had finished his pie, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I made something for you," he said. Mara looked surprised. "You didn't have to." He smiled. "I wanted to." She carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a sketchbook, its cover handmade with a ribbon tied around it. On the first page was a drawing, her standing behind the counter smiling. Across the page were the words, "Kindness doesn't need a reason." Her hands trembled as she turned the pages. Each one was filled with drawings of people and places, some she recognized, some she didn't. There were parks, children, dogs, old houses, and cafes. On one page he had drawn the diner again, only this time it was full of people smiling, eating, and laughing together. At the bottom of that drawing were the words, "Because of you." Mara pressed a hand to her heart. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "It's the best gift I've ever received." Eli smiled, his eyes shining. "I wanted you to have it. You taught me that helping someone doesn't have to be big. Just small things, and like sharing food, listening, smiling, can change everything." She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then she said quietly, "You've grown into such a wonderful young man. Eli, I'm proud of you." He looked down, a little embarrassed but happy. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about art, about school, about life. The customers who came in smiled when they saw them together, not knowing the history they shared but sensing the bond between them. When the sun started to set, Eli said he had to go. "My driver's waiting," he said. Mara walked him to the door. The air outside was golden and soft, the way it always got in the late afternoon. He turned to her and said, "Thank you again for everything." She smiled and touched his shoulder gently. "Take care of yourself, Eli. And remember, no matter where you go, you'll always have a place here." He nodded. "I'll come back again," he said. Then with one last smile, he stepped outside. She watched as he climbed into a dark car waiting at the curb. Before it drove off, he rolled down the window and waved. She waved back, her heart full. As the car disappeared down the road, Mara stood there for a long moment, letting the quiet settle around her. Then she turned, looked up at the painting inside, and smiled. That night after closing, she sat at her favorite booth with a cup of tea and opened the sketchbook again. Each page seemed to tell not just his story, but hers too, how two lives crossed at the right moment and changed forever. She realized something important, that sometimes people come into your life for a reason. Even if you don't understand it right away, you help them, they help you, and then life keeps moving. But the love, the goodness stays behind. The next morning, she placed the sketchbook on a shelf near the counter so everyone who came in could see it. When people asked, she just smiled and said, "That's from someone who reminded me how powerful kindness can be." From then on, the diner became a little different. People came not just for food, but for comfort. Strangers would talk to each other. Regulars would buy coffee for those who couldn't afford it. And laughter filled the air a little more than before. Mara had never been the kind of person to chase fame or recognition, but soon her diner became known around town as the place where kindness lives. Travelers would stop by just to see it, sometimes leaving small notes of gratitude on the tables or drawings in the sketchbook. One day, a reporter came by again, this time not to ask about the boy, but about the message behind her diner. He asked her what made her keep doing what she did. Mara smiled softly and said, "Because someone once reminded me that kindness can save lives, even when you don't know it." The reporter nodded, moved by her words, and wrote an article that touched hearts across the country. Letters began arriving at the diner, from people who had been inspired to help others in small ways. Some wrote that they started volunteering, others said they began feeding stray animals, and some said they simply smiled more at strangers. Every time Mara read one of those letters, she thought of Eli. Years went by and life flowed gently forward. The diner aged gracefully, its walls filled with stories and laughter. The paintings stayed on the wall, the sketchbook stayed on the counter, and Mara kept welcoming everyone with the same warmth. One morning, a new letter arrived, this one with handwriting she recognized instantly. "Dear Mara, I'm in college now, studying art. I wanted you to know that I've been working on a project, a book about people who changed my life. You're the first chapter. I tell everyone about you, and how you taught me that kindness is a kind of language that everyone understands, even when words fail. I hope to open an art studio one day, a place where children who have been through hard times can come to draw, talk, and heal. I'll call it the quiet light because that's what you were to me, a quiet light in a dark place. Thank you again. Mara, you'll always be part of my story with love." Mara held the letter to her chest and smiled through tears. That night, as she locked up the diner and looked out at the quiet street, she felt something peaceful inside her, a kind of warmth that words couldn't describe. She turned off the lights, but before leaving, she glanced one last time at the painting on the wall. The two figures stood there, frozen in a moment of sunlight. The woman with the tray, the boy on the wall. She smiled softly and whispered, "Good night, Eli." And as the night settled over the town, it felt as though somewhere miles away, a young man looked up at the same sky and whispered back, "Good night, Mara." The world was wide, full of noise and change, but between them, there would always be that quiet thread, kindness, strong enough to last a lifetime.